Zach, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for
Excited.
coming on.
Yeah.
I I always like to go back to the start with everybody and kind of ask this question in different forms. But what initially drew you to storytelling in the first place? And then I suppose with a focus on horror, what was it about that genre in particular that kind of interests you?
Ooh, loaded question. I'll go. I'll go all the way back in time and then distill it from there. So I grew up in the southeast in the state of Georgia. I was an only child, so I was left a lot to my own devices. Kind of, built a big imagination around nature and my toys, and I suppose you could say I was probably show running a few different versions of Lego worlds and other kind of action figure landscapes with maybe without knowing it. And then I was also a little bit of the black sheep, as far as I was always into the scary stuff, like the kinds of things that I like to read, a little different than the other kids, scary stories to tell in the dark, goosebumps, that kind of thing, which even, some of the more conservative members in my family thought was a little odd. There were still those concerns back in the 90s of, satanic panic kids and things like that.
Mhm.
And, cinema was just a big part of my life growing up. Like, seeing movies was kind of like, a spiritual experience slash, like, I don't know what you'd compare it to as an adult, like some kind of trip, crazy trip, like seeing Jurassic Park in the theater when you're 8. You just come out of that like, whoa, like, and so I became a big fan of movies, and I guess I continued to be interested in kind of like, you know, anything on the spectrum of horror to sci-fi, to action. That was kind of like my wheelhouse. And as far as storytelling with it, I didn't really get into writing, as playwriting, screenwriting, anything like that till later teens, and into college. And it didn't really, I didn't really know it's what I was. I was also a theater kid in high school, so that was kind of like my thing for a while. I was lucky enough to go to an arts high school. It was public school, but it was a place for us misfit kids to kind of go be creative together in an otherwise very conservative community. And got to play Hamlet. That was pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, our director he kind of did like a Matrix kind of take on it. So I did the whole, trench coat thing, and it was very like cyberpunk. So I don't even know if I knew how cool that was at the time, that I got to do that. And college kind of opened me up. I went to school in New York, at NYU. But again, I studied theater initially. And as I was there, I realized, boy, I really, the more opportunities I had to write, I won this playwriting contest when I was in high school. And so started thinking about screenwriting. A friend of mine sold a screenplay at this local film festival very, very randomly. Kind of got me thinking, wow, like that's pretty cool that like a 16-year-old could, put something together. And, it's kind of empowering when you realize that, you start with a page, and suddenly by the end you have this thing that can become, you have basically the blueprint to a movie. But again, like, kind of minored at NYU and writing and producing, and just did more and more of it on my own. Read a lot of Sid Fields. And it continued to be, a fan and a student of movies. And like, what's interesting for me is when I think about some of my favorite movies, a lot of them are horror movies, but they're not necessarily by horror directors. Like you think about like some of the classics that Hitchcock is known for. Like Psycho, you know, The Birds. He really wasn't a horror. He was a thriller director, a suspense director. Same with Spielberg, you know, early stuff, Jaws, you know, like incredible movie. But again, like known for so many other things. Mary Harron, American Psycho. I mean, American Psycho's maybe, I don't know if I could ever say I have an all-time favorite, but that's well up there. You know, even some of the more recent directors, like of movies that I've really loved in the last 10 years, Jordan Peele, you know, he's a comedian with Get Out. And I mean, everything he's doing now is great. I'm a big fan. And even more recently, Zach Kreger with Barbarian, you know, he
Yeah.
comedy guy coming out with this incredible horror movie. And I just saw Companion as well, which he didn't direct, but he produced, and really impressed by it. So that kind of those are kind of some of the movies I guess you'd say I'm a big fan of in a nutshell. But then when it came to kind of like how I approached my own career, and forgive me if I'm jumping ahead, but you know, kind of what got me inspired to write in a way that I could, you know, make my own work. And that's kind of like, again, going back into like specifically horror. Horror filmmakers are incredible for the DIY aspect of it all. And so some of the people who inspired me there are, you know, like Adam Wingards of the world, the Mike Flanagans, John Suits, you know, people who went out and made their first movies for 35, 50, maybe 100,000. And that's kind of what, when I was wandering around during the recession of, you know, 2008, 09, 2010, you know, after I graduated college, that's what really got my wheels turning. Because I realized that, you know, there was something, I had a lot more to say than just showing up to the auditions that I was going to. And my, you know, just like what inspired me, what excited me, and what was right, what like my world was, you know, going back to horror essentially. So that is what led me to do my first micro budget feature film. And
You've done like you've worn kind of many hats already with like writer, director, producer. I- Is that just a thing of necessity to kind of push projects forward? Is there one of those that you feel like is for you personally more creatively fulfilling?
you know, the producing has been more so a vehicle toward helping along the writing side. And you know, especially coming out, you know, into the industry with not really like family or other kinds of connections. It's like, if you want to make something happen, you really have to be willing to wear those hats. And, you know, the first feature that I did, I really didn't have, I was like a credit card debt, right? It's like 25,000 that I gave myself to say, all right,
Yeah.
go out and make it happen. And so in that case, you know, it was like I had to wear every hat I could because it's what I could afford. So I mean, I directed it, I wrote it, I was in it, I produced it, you know, I edited it, I did the special effects, the sound design, everything. And you know, most of those things I was kind of self-taught along the way, you know, kind of like a big old crash course in the whole thing. And there's certain things that, you know, if I could have just done one of them, would have might have made it a bit more fun. You know, so that I'm not up in the back seat of the SUV we rented at 4 a.m. painting the green screen, you know, the the thing to make her the co-star float in the alien reduction scene, right? But you know, I did learn from that some of the things that I definitely didn't want to do. And a lot of people will say, "Oh my God, why wouldn't you want to direct?" But For me personally, like directing is it's like having to be OCD and ADD all at the same time. And owning every single aspect while also being all in everything all at once. And for me, when I look back again at like kind of my childhood and kind of like the independent imaginary space that I spent so much of my time in, it makes sense that I'm more comfortable writing. I can go off into my imagination. No one bothers me there. Just it's just me and the world and the characters and kind of working through it. And then you come out and I will transition sometimes from the phase of having done some, a few drafts of something and say, all right, it's time to transition into kind of networking and pushing this out. Initially that was a bigger lift than it is now, where I have developed a pretty good network of friends, honestly, and other producers, just people who I like to work with now, and who like to work with me. And But yeah, I would say it became necessity is the mother of invention when it came to getting the first few projects made, and I was certainly happy to lend a hand with other talented friends, and still am. When I come across a really great project, that I'm like, I'd love that to be, part of the brand or whatever. And that's in the case of this movie, Fear Inc. That was just having moved to LA and been there a couple of years, made friends with the writer of that, Luke Barnett, and just loved that script. And at the same time, while helping them put that together, there's cross pollination, and I'm certainly not someone who, I suppose, because I didn't grow up in Hollywood, I'm not like overly aggressive nor protective of relationships. I think like a rising tide lifts all ships, and so I like to share the relationships I have, and I kind of like you hope that people are the same way and not overly guarded, because again, it is always a numbers game. There is always an aspect of, well, if you kind of only sent the project to a few people, you only have so many chances. If you only know a few people, if you know 100 people, that you have more chances of the timing lining up with someone. And it is always about timing. So yeah, I've just always felt most comfortable with writing. But I have probably landed, half the other jobs I've had because I have the producer experience. And the other things, I would have loved to spend more time, going down the editing road or going down other paths. But at a certain point, you have to focus in and decide, what are you best at? What do you love doing the most? And for me, that came back to writing.
When you decided that this is something that, you wanted to be a career, something you wanted to take more serious, did you get much pushback from friends, family, loved ones, partner, anything like that? Because I feel like a lot of the audience always reach out and, they say things like that and they want people to ask that question, whether it be parents tell you like, come on, you've got to get like a real job, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner that says like, really, like you're gonna make movies, you're gonna like, come on, like get a grip.
100%. It's almost like you read my mind asking that question, because it is such a part of that story. And I mean, if anything, the only thing that saved me was the economy was so bad when I was out there, that like, and I had such a terrible day job that, at least I had kind of an out. It's not like I was sacrificing a serious, established career path. I was young enough. I was young enough to take a risk like that, but not much. You wouldn't want to be. I mean, I was like, when I was like 26 or so, when I decided to quit my job and go into credit card debt. And yes, there were actual fights with family on the phone. And again, not to throw my family under the bus, they're the most loving, amazing parents that you could have asked for. But again, it's a different thing. I didn't grow up. They don't know anyone that does what I do, and so to them, it was, essentially they just viewed it as a crazy kind of harebrained gamble. And in some ways, I can't say that it wasn't. I think like every time you go out there and make art, and you don't know how you're going to monetize it, which is most of the time, that is a form of gamble. But my argument, my pushback was, hey, would you rather I go into student loan debt, go to grad school for 2 years, like AFI or something, only to be starting, again, without even a calling card? I was like, I get it. This is risky, but like, I need this calling card. I need to go make something, like no one's going to just randomly start, my career other than me. No one's going to randomly email me and offer me some really cool job, especially, in 2011, 2012, when I was really starting to get this going. It was a bit of a, it was a difficult time emotionally. It was a difficult time in terms of relationship with family. Now coming through on the other side, few years later, they started to come around. A few years later, they started to say, okay, go to a couple festivals, see the movie on, video on demand, or, in theaters in a couple cases. And, I think they realized, okay, this wasn't so crazy after all. But it took a lot of convincing. And it took a lot of, blood, sweat, and tears to get through those early years.
And I feel like a lot of times as well, and I always say this to people whenever anyone messages me, mentions stuff like that, and I'm like, sometimes, whether it's a family member, friends, whatever, partner, a lot of times they think they're doing it from the right place. They're not even trying to be like horrible about it. It's more like a protection thing where they're like, no, don't even do this. Just protect yourself from that risk. And I try to tell people that like maybe it's just that. It's just they're trying to protect you from like the fear of, because like you said, it is kind of one of those industries where most people don't know somebody that works in that industry. So it's kind of hard to, the concept of, well, wouldn't it be easier if you just got a job at the grocery store? At least we know that works.
Yeah. There's a mentality that if you're doing something and there's not a paycheck every couple of weeks, that what are you doing? You're not even working. You're almost like an attitude of like, oh, you're trying to get out of life, or you're trying to like be some kind of lottery winner or deadbeat, some combination thereof. And it's like, if they're not artists themselves, and if they haven't taken a risk, maybe say even starting a business, right? Like if they're, and most people, it's not that life hasn't been, life has been more so the opposite. It's been very reliable, accountable, and very like kind of a ladder of kind of employment over time. And so to see your kid suddenly what appears to be going gambling, going off the rails, spending money too. I mean, I absolutely understand, and I do empathize with where they were coming from, because they did mean well. They weren't trying to crush anyone's dreams. You know what I mean? It's just that tension is very real, and it's a part of a lot of people's experience who get started in this, again, if they didn't grow up in that world.
How difficult has it been for you to, I guess, overcome that and then continually? Because I'm sure there's always those, those times where you're going like second guessing things, or, if I had a, what if I had have zigged when I should have zagged, and all that sort of stuff. And it's something that I think is very real. People struggle with it, and a lot of people give up. They don't stay the course. And maybe that's the difference in who succeeds and who doesn't. Because a lot of people think, okay, well, and maybe they do. I know how to write, or I know how to do this thing, or I know how to do that thing. But it's like they just don't have that grit, or they don't understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint?
You know, some of the really great advice I've gotten early in my career was from this guy who at the time was an assistant at CAA, and I just moved out to LA. I didn't have an agent or manager or anything. I had a lawyer who helped me on a couple things, and a lot of people that's what they end up getting first, just to help you do a deal. And so anyway, he introduced me to this assistant at CAA who was like, "Oh, I'll have coffee with you." And his advice was essentially like, "How long can you hang out? How long can you hang out?" I didn't really get it at the time. I was like, "I don't know, man. I'm hustling. Like I'm
Yeah.
making these things happen. I got my first feature, almost through post here, and how long can you hang out?" And then over time, as I had different cycles of my career, which it's very cyclical, there's a huge risk of imposter syndrome, even after you've just done something really cool. The really cool accomplishment wears off very quickly because then you realize, oh, like I don't know what's next. And maybe I have a coal or two in the fire, but suddenly it can go very quiet. And then you're like, is this real? Like, is this happening? Um, and I have had a few periods over the last decade where it's been so quiet that I've had to go through the sort of identity crisis. The am I gonna like take a step back? Do I need to think about other things? At the exact moment that I reach my kind of heart of darkness, part of the hero's journey, something's come through, and I'll knock on wood as I say that, but kind of like that resurrection moment of with the first feature I did, it was like I'd applied to so many festivals with it, and I was like, man, I get it. It's a $25,000 movie. It's a little rickety. It's a little low budge, but I was still proud of it. I thought that it held up for what it was, and you know the it just the last couple months where it was like, oh man, it's like it was probably early October, and I'm thinking, man, if I'm gonna even be in any of the genre circuit horror festivals, I'd have heard by now. Maybe I really need to take a step back and rethink things. And then I hear from Other Worlds Austin, which was this sci-fi festival founded by a former programmer at Austin Film Festival, and it was like, we'd love to let this be like your world premiere if you haven't done anything yet, and we'll kind of put it up there for the big weekend. And I was like, okay, all right, I guess it's real. I guess I'm gonna go and like get a publicist and do this whole festival thing now. And I would say every few years since then there'll be something very cyclical like that, where excitement happens, and I'll join a new production company, or a friend and I will a feature that's been sitting in some level of development for 2 or 3 years that I think is dead, and then suddenly it's like overnight somebody is looking for this exact thing and they want to do it, and then it's like dominoes, and then again a project will come out. I remember with this one, Slayers, premiered at Screamfest in 2022. I got COVID, so I couldn't go. And then it's there was a lot of kind of excitement and buzz around it for a bit, and then by early to middle of 2023, I was like, what's going on? It's so quiet, and then the strike hit. The strike was a really weird time, a time when a lot of people had to reassess, and I went in and took a desk, not a desk job, but like a kind of in-house role at like a podcast studio during that time, where WGA members, a lot of people joined that company at that time to kind of just have an overhead, because nobody knew how long the strike was going to go and what everyone was going to do. And so there's also a certain level of flexibility as well. It's like, all right, well, I've got this background of having worn all these hats, and like when I need to jump into a different role, it may not be my my dream of doing a studio rewrite or something, but hey, it's like I can keep the lights on. I've got the production background. I can handle development. I can handle audio. I did. I co-created and produced a podcast a few years ago as well. So I've kind of like seen where if you're just willing to be somewhat adaptable and you've built up a certain level of skill, that like you can usually find somewhere to help you keep the lights on, some kind of role. But if you're idealistic about it and you kind of only want to do one thing, it can be a little harder to survive the ups and downs. So I'm glad is again, like I said, necessity is the mother of invention. I wish I could have only ever written. I have a few friends, very successful writers, who pretty much write 98, 99% of the time. And that's awesome. But my path has just been different. So that's how I've survived.
In those down periods, because this is something I've heard likened to the idea of a roller coaster. You have that big, like, we go up, 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 and then you have to. There's no way that you can't have that, that crest where you go down, and then you'll come up a bit, and then it could go back down further, and then the next thing you're on top of the world again. And in those down periods, outside of obviously the financial obligations and having to kind of switch maybe gears and do something else for a little while, and while you work on other stuff in the background, I suppose mentally, how do you keep your head above water? I feel like a lot of people struggle with that. They kind of, is it just because it is genuinely your dream? Because someone said to me before, well, if you can be talked out of your dream that easily, then maybe it wasn't that much of your dream to start with. Is that maybe the driving force? Is someone who wants to be a writer or wants to be a director so bad that it literally doesn't really matter how bad things get? They're never going to truly just say, I have enough.
I think that's a really great way to frame it. I would say so. And within the context of the dream of it all, I would also add that like there's an engine in there as well. There's a creative engine that can't be stopped either, And so that, it's certainly not blind optimism that gets you through. That would leave you very disappointed. And I think like early in my career, there was a lot more kind of a blind, naive side to it. Just like, oh, well, this friend of mine did this. I'll just kind of follow in their footsteps and it'll all be, hunky dory, yellow brick road. And it wasn't. It was very much a roller coaster, so many highs and lows. And, I realized that I also had to address that from the standpoint of like how I viewed what could or should happen in my career, and I needed to honestly have less expectations. There was a bit of a frustration early on, and really just like again just going with all the highs and the lows, and I really actually had I feel like I was saved a bit by my meditation practice and just kind of being able to step back from it and isolate kind of like what I love about it from the outcomes. So that's kind of how I've dealt with it. And that way the highs aren't as high and the lows aren't as low, but it's just kind of like this more even path. And really like, again, leaning into the work, leaning into what I'm excited by about what stories I want to tell at the time, and sort of being able to then go back and let that experience be pure, let it be for me, and then sort of like let the market decide after. But the illusion of being able to make it happen or kind of like time it or really be in control of it, which so many people in their career, that's their safety, that's what a stable job gives. And so when you don't have that, yes, you're in a constant, low level or higher level identity crisis, or financial stress. You are really having to put faith in something, because at a certain point you're not the one in control. It takes a village to make these things. And I think eventually, when I saw it happen enough times, it started to make it. I started to be able to trust that a little bit more. But it took a lot of years of disappointment and coming very close, and then something not coming together, and then a few more years of, hey, a project did get greenlit. Oh my God, and like, I guess now it's happening. And then, a few years in a row of it happening has made it a little easier for me to trust it. But, but again, like there's always something. There's if it's not a strike, it's AI. If it's, there's always some reason that if you want to like run for the hills, go
Yeah.
back to school and do something different, you can shake the tree, and anyone that's not hanging on tight will fall. And many of my friends early on, I mean, within a few years of school, a lot of people I knew just were out. And other people adapted and they found what worked for them. And maybe it wasn't what they initially imagined. Maybe they wanted to direct, but they became an editor. And maybe it wasn't even an editor on necessarily a Netflix show. Maybe it was just a reality show, but they stayed in the game in some way. They stayed in the business. Maybe instead of becoming a producer, they became a talent representative or something. So I have friends across the industry who all sort of, you could probably trace back starting for the love of that, right? But then finding your foothold or finding your place in that. It can be, if you're adaptable, you can make it work. It's just you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Is what I.
That's a good way of putting that. Um, you likened it to, having an engine and not being able to switch that off, which is another thing I think people struggle with is when you're in a creative industry like this, it can become all consuming and people struggle to have relationships or keep relationships or whatever. Is that something that you've ever dealt with? And if so, is there anything that you feel like you've been able to get a handle on that allows that? Because I find like at a, even myself at a way lower level, there's times where I feel like if I get involved in something, it becomes all consuming, and then I get maybe a little bit aggravated with people close to me because I'm like, you're bothering me, and I'm trying to like focus on this thing, not realizing that like all of a sudden, I've just not completely disregarded them, but like, it's gone from being 90% present to like 10.
100%, 100%. And it's another thing I've had to work on. There's a certain like temptation with this stuff, because also writing, especially, but any kind of work that you're immersed in, you have no idea how fast time can go. Same thing with musicians. A band practice might go 3 hours. It feels like 30 minutes. And writing is very much of that nature. Especially when I'm, in a full draft mode, deadline, anything deadline driven. I might disappear for hours and come out and think I've been away for maybe at most an hour, and then my wife's like, "You got to come out of the cave." I haven't seen you, again, especially early on, it was a big lesson, because it did put, especially my relationship with my then girlfriend, under a lot of stress and strain. And it was like I had to realize that there were other priorities, other things in life that there's a time to give everything over. There's a time to work really hard, and pour yourself into something. But there's an opportunity cost to living your life, and maintaining those relationships. And you don't want to come out of, hey, I created this awesome thing, but now what? Who am I sharing my
Yeah.
life with? Who am I sharing the fun and the success? Or, hey, I had a really disappointing day. Something fell apart right before it was about to shoot. Hey, like, there's no one, no shoulder to cry on. Like, I think relationships are hugely important, especially in a world where, yes, it can be a roller coaster. It just can. And so you want a strong support system, whether it's a significant other or friends, whatever it may be. And maybe some of them are in the industry, and hopefully some of them do other things. You know, like I like the fact that my wife's not in the industry. She was a child actor, but she really moved on from that. And now she's into like astrology and agriculture, wellness, things that help me live a healthier life.
Yeah.
And I kind of call her sometimes my phantom thread. I don't know if you saw the Daniel Day-Lewis movie, but
Mhm.
she kind of is the one that helps remind me to live and to step out of the workspace, which is also fun. I'm not gonna say that like, I mean, I'm not, I didn't go through all the difficulties of trying to break in and get movies made because it wasn't fun. It is, but it's also work, and that's something that again, you know, most people that aren't on the inside of it kind of see it one way or the other, but it is still work and it is still very time consuming. So I have to say, like, you know, I'm grateful and I would recommend having people in your life that help remind you to step out of the cave.
Yeah, it's a funny one because I feel like it is like what you said. It's like there's certain people that give away everything to achieve something, and then when the dust settles, it's like, well, everybody's gone now because I just neglected everything else, and you're just left. And then it's like not as maybe as amazing as you thought it was going to be because you don't have that person to share it with. You don't have a family, you don't have friends, you don't because you just completely. I've had a couple of conversations behind the scenes with people who I was surprised by that said that, and they were like, "Yeah, I had to basically restart life at like, 50 something years of age, and it was a really bitter pill to have to swallow."
Well, yeah, and I mean, it also can depend on you know the situation, and some people, if they're pulled into writing 10 seasons of a show or show running, I mean, some of those, some of the work schedules and that environment can be, that consuming, and you could wake up, forget, a week or month, you could wake up 10 years and realize, oh my god, like I haven't had any time. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I'm with. I don't know what happened. And so, for better or worse, I haven't had, I haven't been called up to the extent that I've lost years at a time. And I'm sure that like most people, as much as you love your craft, eventually that comes around to everybody. No one probably really wants to live life all completely on their own, just with their work. I think everybody wants to come up for air and share life, with people that they love. And so, something I had to work on. Luckily, it's something that I've overcome to the extent of I'm not like, and again, there are always exceptions. Something's really pressing. I did work a little bit on our honeymoon. I felt bad about it, but also, like at the time I was doing these shows for Snapchat, and it just coincided with production got pushed, and it was like I'm the one working with the creative executive, do the rewrites. I have to get Wi-Fi on this friggin' cruise ship, and luckily she was off to bed, and it was because it was summer in Alaska. It was still like
Right, yeah.
it was like light at like 11:30 at night. So I'm up and I'm like, oh, at least it's light, and I'm like do this work and go to bed. So I try to work around it more. If I have to lose sleep, I'd rather lose sleep than lose time with, my wife or anyone else who's maybe visiting in town or a friend I made plans with. It's like, you know what? I'll see you. I'll keep my dinner date, and maybe I'll just stay up a little bit late tonight and get it done on my own time.
Yeah, that's actually and someone told me before they were like, you know what, if you have to do that from time to time, it's not actually going to kill you. You'll be fine. Because that's another like misconception. You mentioned something about rewriting scripts or something like that earlier. I can't remember how you actually mentioned it, but I did want to ask if you could remake or reimagine any like existing IP or horror franchise or a character, is there one that sticks out in front of the rest of them, and why?
That is a great question. You know, a couple years back, there was an open writing assignment where I didn't have I let a manager of mine go, and so it wasn't the best time. It was also leading up to the strike and a really weird time. But I was, kind of searching around to see if maybe someone could get me in for it. There was a video game that I grew up playing called Duke Nukem. It is a
Hmm.
kind of almost like love letter to every 80s action sci-fi
Yeah.
horror movie. Like it's all kind of
Yeah.
a mashup.
Yeah.
Um, and like I don't know how it will work. I don't know who got the assignment. There's really been nothing out on it for a couple years. As far as who's writing it and like the vibe. I would imagine it would clash with the kind of Hollywood culture that is, uh, making things very clean and very PC, because Duke Nukem is anything but. Duke Nukem is kind of macho and kind of, what people would say kind of a little bit old fashioned, a little bit crude, as far as the what people might define as male toxicity. But I
Hmm.
don't know. I love the character. I love the world. I love everything about it, and I had a whole outline going for that. Part of me, you see these projects that get bought with the IPs. They're hiring rounds of writers that they can't get it, or the studio doesn't like it. They change their mind, rights fall back. So I'm still kind of like waiting in the wings if it falls out. And I mean, it's the kind of thing where a lot of friends of mine, because of the way the industry is these days, they take into, go out and find IP, and they'll write something for free as long as
Mm.
there's a producer attached. They'll just write it on spec. And in the case of something like that, that's you know uh, got its own big following, and it would be very easy to like shop once you write it. I would certainly do a project like that on spec because it would be fun, and I think it would be, aside from being a lot of fun, like something that I think, because again I grew up playing it. It's like a world that like I just am so I'm not an expert in a ton of IP, but that one has stuck out to me. And so it's the kind of thing that I would be excited to take out, even just as a sample, just to see, if it gets people excited. But the studio world, it's its own animal. I will say, I've dipped my toes into it. I've been in it here and there, but it's a lot trickier to make anything happen, than in the sort of independent space that I spend most of my time in. But honestly, a lot of other video game IP interests me. I was a big gamer as a kid, and so a lot of that kind of like '90s to early aughts, Nintendo 64, and anything in that era of Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, the early PlayStations, and honestly, just throw me anything, and I would love to adapt it.
There's a lot of interest in IP there, I think. I do remember, speaking of the Duke Nukem thing, and I don't know how like where this came from. It could have been just an internet rumor. I do remember at one point it was doing the rounds on Reddit or somewhere that John Cena was going to play
I saw
uh, Duke Nukem. I don't know if that was just like people were trying to like make some sort of like funny thing or whatever. That
you know
would be an interesting one. Is there somebody you would see, let's say, that movie, you write a movie, it's getting made. Is there someone in particular that sticks out in your mind that you're like, yeah, I'd like to see that person play?
the only person I could really think of, it's weird. John Cena it's a weird one for me for that role. Like he's kind of like, because Duke Nukem has to be like just show up, not even say a word, and just a badass. John Cena's kind of, he's
Yeah.
quirky, he's charming, he's kind of quirky. He's a little too goofy in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would never say yes, but I would love, like, I worked with Thomas Jane actually on that one, and honestly, like, and maybe they'd say he's a bit old, but I don't know if you set it like in the present, and if like what my
Yeah.
like if the attack happens in the 90s and then you go 20 years later, Thomas Jane, he's got the voice. If you just buff him up a bit and do the haircut, I feel like he kind of has that whatever the badass machismo of the original spirit of that character. And I think he's a great actor as well. And I loved working with him. But he's had an interesting career. He's been in the big studio space. He's done a lot of indies, and every now and again he'll go do a kind of studio level movie. But I'm sure that they would want someone a little bit bigger. Studios don't like take risks the way the indies do, but a bigger budget. And if there's a world where the movie gets made as a big budget indie, it could be a different story. But so much of this stuff, it goes to foreign sales. It goes to what they name talent on, and how they can sell that around the world. And if someone's not kind of a known entity, then it just becomes, they'll want a John Cena or The Rock.
I literally was just gonna say The Rock, because like
Pretty great.
I was looking at the numbers financially, like that he does in like Asia and all those markets, and it's like, I thought he was popular, in the Western world, but my God,
yeah,
it's wild.
Yeah, if you want to make a movie that you can feel comfortable spending 30, 40, 50, 100 million on, you kind of has to rest on the shoulders of a giant like that.
I have a couple of quick fire questions I'd like to ask before I let you go. Do you have any horror related guilty pleasures, like a so bad it's good kind of movie, or a movie that you get shit from people because you're like, you know what, I enjoy that?
That's a really good question. Wow. I'll have to think about it. Like, I feel like most of my horror, movies are, it's like I've watched a lot of, schlock, but I don't know if like any of them necessarily stick out as being, where I would say, oh, like I'm a fan of this or that. I don't know. I mean, I would say like, what's a controversial one? I mean, I think what's controversial is that I'll say this, like, for me, American Psycho is a comedy. That's what's controversial, like I laugh a lot. Like harm. Same with Get Out. Like I laughed a lot during that.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, it's like, I guess it's like a more of a kind of sense of humor with it, that like, people be like, whoa, why do you like that? I'm like, oh, I thought it was really funny. So I would say that's kind of like, if there's a guilty pleasure, I had to say it's like the fact that, I find humor where some people might not.
Do you have a favorite horror icon, like a character, whether it be Freddy, Chucky, Jason, any of those, or even an obscure one?
Ooh. That's a really good question as well. Um, man, like, I think my favorite monster, if you want to know that,
Yeah.
it's almost not even necessarily a horror specific one, because it kind of blends the space of horror and sci-fi. But I really love the Mothman, and
Yeah.
I love that the Mothman Prophecies as well. But I love the kind of liminal space that the Mothman exists in. Like where you don't really know what it is. You don't know kind of like what dimension it's from. You don't know if it's going to attack you, or is it just, foretelling, some kind of doomsday event. So I'm really, like, as much as I love like all of the big sort of like horror characters, like I there's something about the Mothman that like, because I think it just freaks me out. It freaks me out, the idea of like seeing that, the idea that it can just come out of nowhere, and you know just the kind of like, there's something about it that feels like I kind of like feel like, like some of the horror characters is like they're relegated to that movie, and
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
see them on Halloween, but there's something about the Mothman that I feel like he could actually show up outside my house one day.
At any point.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
I think that's what gets.
Um, where can people best support you, or where can people keep up to date with what you're doing? And also, I know it's probably difficult to talk about, specifics of what's next, and a lot of times things kind of have to be kept under wraps, but maybe to give people an idea of like looking forward, what you are intending to do next.
Yeah, I mean, people can follow me. I finally got on social media a few years ago. I was very reluctant. I had a profile for our dog. I was getting like announcements would come, and then my dog was getting tagged in them instead of me. And I was like, I should probably not have my dog get tagged in Deadline. I should probably create a profile. So I have Zack_Imbrogno on there on Instagram. And like, the best way to support, I always just say like, check out a movie. I got a few out there on VOD, and like, check out a trailer, and see if you like it, and maybe give it a shot. Most of these movies are pretty cheap these days. If you have Hulu, I think that one's still free on there, Slayers. So I'm like, hey, watch the free one. I don't care. Just I always just feel that watching each other's work is always the best way to support people. And in terms of what's next, there are a few things. I mean, I got one in post that's been announced, so I can talk a little bit about it. It's Stay at Home. It's kind of like a near future dystopian pandemic sci-fi slasher.
This
um,
sounds good.
yeah, it's something I actually wrote during the pandemic, and then of course no one wanted to do like a Screen Life movie during an actual pandemic when we're all living through screens. But right toward the tail end of the strike, started to get some. I think people finally felt like COVID was over, and there's almost a bit of a COVID. I wouldn't call it nostalgia, but kind of like people revisiting that and being able to have enough distance from it. And so that I did. My buddy K. Asher Levin that I worked a lot with, he directed it, and I wrote it, and we got some really cool cast for it. Young cast, really talented folks. I'll tell you, Screen Life movies in post, not the easiest to edit. All the graphics, all the different kind of like, there's just a lot going on. So it's getting close, and we have a company helping us kind of tie up post with it. So it should be out. I think our goal with that is Halloween of this year,
Very
unless we
nice.
try and do festivals with it. It's not the kind of movie that it's going to like be at midnight at the Sundance Festival or something. It's pretty hardcore. It's a fun one. And I have a project with Kevin Lewis, who directed Willy's Wonderland. That one I can't really go into as much because we'll want to kind of save that for the announcement. It's been close a couple times. I can say that. I mean, it's a Christmas horror. It's a Christmas horror with some comedy to it as well. Which I always find myself in subgenres. I don't know if I've ever just done a straight horror. Always horror with this and that, and kind of keeps it interesting to me, I guess, and not one note. And then I'm just, there's always like a few other things that I'm
Yeah.
writing in my own thing or with someone else. I'm doing something. My next thing that I'm just writing is kind of in the Until the Devil Knows You're Dead, You're Next kind of wheelhouse space, a
Okay.
little bit more of a thriller horror, but a little bit more in kind of like green room versus like, some of the other stuff I've done where it's been, like I haven't really done a proper horror thriller. So excited for that. And then just, kind of whatever else comes my way. It's just every week, every month is a little bit of an adventure because you don't know what's going to happen or what's going to be the priority. The Christmas horror thing starts to go with Kevin. Maybe I'm suddenly dropping
Yeah.
everything to do the rewrite on that, and so I never plan too far ahead. I just always have a few things stacked up that I'm excited to try to get to until something else takes priority, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. For everybody listening, if you're watching on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast platform, all the links to Zach's stuff will be down below in the description, both his Instagram and the links to his movies in whatever region you're in. I do have a final question before I let you go, and that's I suppose you've mentioned that writing is probably your thing that you're most creatively fulfilled by. So my question then would be why writing and what does it mean to you? I know from an audience standpoint, we know what we get from the stories that are crafted, but if I was to flip that question back for you, I suppose not even professionally, but personally, what is it that draws you to that aspect of it?
It's a great question, and it's funny to think about what makes yourself tick, right? It's funny to think about like what is driving me to do this, what is exciting to this about me, and I think honestly, coming full circle to what is exciting me about horror, and why I spend time in that space, is that there's something ultimately almost spiritual about it for me, like the idea of like you know setting this up, putting people on the cliff, putting people on the edge of life, and kind of living through that again and again. Well, there's nothing more. I don't know. There's nothing to me that makes me feel more alive than the fear of getting
Yeah.
killed. And that's why like I not a lot of people talk about horror in like a spiritual way, but it kind of is for me. Anytime I'm writing or watching horror, I'm constantly kind of going through that. Oh, thank God, I'm still alive. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
it makes you appreciate life when you spend time, putting people on the edge or putting characters in peril. And it's kind of like, just like for people that like might feel trapped by the mundane. I feel like horror is very exhilarating, and it's exhilarating to me. And I think sometimes indulging those fears, which are also like very very natural. I'm a little bit of a neurotic. I think that there's a healthy dose of that I can just naturally integrate into my work by way of
Hmm.
my imagination. And so it's all very organic for me. But I think ultimately, like, where it hits me strongest is in just an appreciation for, it makes me feel alive. I'll just sum it up that way.
I like that. Zach, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to do this again. I can't wait to hear more about some of those projects when you can talk about them, and I hope that we can do this again when
Yeah.
some of that stuff gets officially announced, that we can actually come back and like talk in more detail about some of that stuff. Like I said, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time and being so gracious.
Likewise, man. Thanks so much for having me on. It really was a great, discussion, and your questions are really thoughtful. And I appreciated the time or the chance to have this time to talk and share about stuff with you.
Yeah, man, I would love to stay in touch. Like I said, for everybody else, all the links to Zach's stuff will be down below in the description. So make sure and check those out. And yeah, like I said, wish you all the best. I can't wait to hear what's next. And let's stay in touch and do this again.
Thanks so much. Absolutely. I'll keep you posted as things
Thanks,
go.
man.
All right.